Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Everybody, I have had so much fun over the past couple months answering some newsletter subscribers' questions, and it's been so interesting to get some new ideas of topics to cover, so I thought I would keep going. So this week's question is from a newsletter subscriber named Emily. Emily's high-level question summary is, when do you know if it's right, or when do you know if it's the right time for a career change? And how to deal with rejection. So here are Emily's question details. She says, I went freelance a few years ago and have been loving it. I've had amazing clients, and best of all, my flexible schedule has allowed me to travel all over Europe and Central America and to finish my novel, which I'm querying to agents now. The querying process is hard. I even used to work in the publishing industry, and everyone, even the best connected, have difficulty with this process. I've been struggling to deal with rejection and continue. Whenever I get a rejection, my instinct is to go look for full-time jobs or give up, or even to buy a ticket to my parents' house in veg. Haha. Anyway, I think this is a two-part question. How to handle rejection, especially when we say how to process feelings. How do we do that and get over it and persevere? And then when to know when it's the right time to give up from a certain path and move on. She also says, maybe this is a way to talk about creativity and perseverance in general. I know a lot of people just say the process is the art, just keep making, but I find your advice to be so practical and grounding. So I'm curious how you think about creative resilience and career resilience. Or if you know, just how those of us whose instincts are run can put the brakes on a little harder. So Emily, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for your question. I know that you know this, but I also just want to say I am just beyond confident that you are not at all alone in feeling this way. I know that there are many, many folks out there who are struggling with continuing to keep going despite rejection, just like you. And even many folks out there who are struggling with this exact same question of, when is it time to call it quits, to change careers, to move on? So today I wanted to give some ideas that I hope will be supportive to you and to anyone listening to this. I think at a high level, you framed it really well when you said there's really two questions within this. There's like a short-term rejection question. How do we handle the rejection on a day-to-day level? And then second, there's this more long-term question. When do we decide to move on? So I'm going to tackle those questions in just that order. And I'm going to start with this first shorter-term question of how to deal with rejection on a day-to-day basis. How do I keep working despite rejection? So to answer this question, I have 4 practical ideas, but I also want to frame it with a bit of a high-level concept. So you mentioned that you're a freelancer and that you're also a novelist. So you are already aware that you have 2 jobs. You have the one job that brings in cash day to day. That's your freelance job. And you have another that is writing your novel. So that's the job where you're writing your novel day to day. And if you were my client, I would point out that I think it might be useful for you in your own mind to think of yourself as actually having 3 jobs. Because to me, your job as a novelist actually requires 2 really different skill sets. And I think it would be useful for you to think of them, again, as just 2 completely different jobs. Your first job, your more obvious job, it's your writing job. You are writing novels, sitting down at your laptop, writing words in a story. But then you have a second job, which is some sort of sales or maybe sales and marketing job. Right now, your sales job, it sounds like, is to pitch yourself to agents. My understanding, and you use this word too, is that in the field of publishing, that's called querying, but it's really a pitching game. It's a sales game. And even if you do get an agent, which I hope you will, from the published authors that I know, the sales and marketing game doesn't end. You have to advocate for yourself, pitch yourself, sell yourself throughout your career, even after you get an agent. I say that because I think that there is an opportunity for you, Emily, to potentially grow in terms of your skillfulness at your sales and marketing job. I'm going to say that one again. I think there may be an opportunity for you, Emily, to grow in terms of your skillfulness at your sales and marketing job, because sales and marketing are just a very, very different skill set than novel writing. And I wonder if just having that thought in your head, I want to grow, I want to become way better at sales and marketing. I wonder if that thought alone, if you got nothing else from this podcast, would serve you profoundly. And I will say, as sort of a side note, I think a lot of us ultimately have two jobs like this. I know that coaches absolutely do. And this, frankly, comes to many coaches, my field, as a surprise. And I think it's the reason why, again, in my own industry, many coaches struggle to make a living at coaching. It was a big part of why I struggled to make a full professional living at coaching for quite some time, because we don't look clearly at the reality of having a sales job or a sales and marketing job in addition to our more obvious coaching job. So my kind of 4 ideas in this next section, where we're talking about how to deal with the day-to-day rejection, they're ultimately about how to do just that. How do you become more skillful at your sales and marketing job? And for purposes of this next section, I'm going to simplify sales and marketing job to just sales, because I think the sales job is the hardest part. And for me, the struggles and the joys, by the way, because sales jobs have joys. The struggles and the joys of the job are similar to straight sales jobs. And I think that thinking about sales jobs more generally has some useful insights that I hope will be helpful to you. So with that in mind, 4 different ideas for how to deal with day-to-day rejection at your sales job. Okay, so the first suggestion I have for you is, in whatever way that you can, and in every way that you can, I think it would be wise for you to separate writing and selling. I'm going to say that again. In whatever way that you can, and in every way that you can, I think it would be wise to separate writing and selling. And I really do mean this in as wide-ranging a way as possible. Like, certainly you could do temporal separation, so in terms of time. I would love for you to be doing your writing work and thinking about your writing work at very different times of day or on very different days than your selling work. So just to give some specific examples, maybe you're writing every morning from 8 to 9:30, then you maybe do your freelance work, and then maybe you do your selling at a totally different time, like 3 hours of selling on Friday afternoons, or 1 hour of selling from 4 to 5 p.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. But I want them to be separate activities, ideally, in terms of time. I don't want you to mush them together. And ideally, I want you to know when the selling happens. So that kind of speaks to temporal separation in terms of time. I would also, in a dream world, love for the separation to even be environmental. Like, maybe you do your selling work at this very particular coffee shop or this very particular library. Maybe you sit, maybe if only, all the work that you do is at your house, maybe you just sit at the breakfast bar in your kitchen to sell, and you never sit there when you write your fiction. There's other kinds of separation too, like maybe you wear a very particular outfit, which is like your selling outfit, which you don't wear for anything else. Maybe you have this like little blazer that you wear, or maybe you drink out of this very particular mug that you only drink out of during selling times. And another form of environmental separation, of course, could just be like technological separation. So maybe there's like an email account that you use just for querying. And then your other selling duties and, maybe whatever other selling duties you have, and you only check that account, again, 3 times a week at these very particular times during your selling times. And if everything that I've said to you seems kind of like silly and maybe even inconsequential, like maybe you're thinking to yourself, Katie, why are you talking to me about wearing a special blazer or sitting in a special place? I would urge you to take it seriously if you can. At least in this season, when you are building your resilience as a salesperson, when you are feeling more confident, when you are feeling less fragile or less porous to the rejection, I honestly don't think it matters as much. But if you are still tender about it, if you are still struggling on the querying side of things, then I think it does really matter. And here is my take. I think selling Emily and writing Emily, they've got very different vibes. They've got very different goals. They've got very different challenges. The way that a salesperson has to be in the world is very different from the way an artist, a writer has to be in the world. So when you're in that sensitive, creative zone, when you're writing and grappling with a complex character arc, I do not want you to be worrying about whether an agent has gotten back to you. I want you to be able to say to yourself, This is not when I worry. I worry about it when I'm wearing that blazer, when I'm sitting at my kitchen counter, when, on Fridays at 3 p.m. And when you're grinding in your sales role, which again is going to be a little bit of what that is. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. I do not want you trying to worry about accessing that free-flowing wild creativity. So that's a first big thing that I would say. Separate those two versions of Emily. So if you have done that, if you separate the two, now I want to talk about who Emily can be at her sales job and how she can do that job well. So my second suggestion when we're talking about Emily at her sales job is that you think of your sales job as a genuine part-time job. Like, how would you behave differently if you got hired to do a part-time job in sales? To my understanding, I'm not only a salesperson, though I do sell in my business, but my understanding is that a big part of working in sales is just getting the reps in. There's this wonderful story that I love from Atomic Habits where James Clear tells this story about this guy named Trent. I think his last name is Dursmid, but I'm sure I'm going to say that wrong. So Trent, he's a brand new stockbroker. It's the 90s when stockbrokers were more of a thing. He's in this sleepy suburb of Vancouver. He's 23. He's never really sold before. And a big part of his job was sales, just making sales calls as a stockbroker. So he created this practice where he just started every day with 2 jars on his desk. One was empty and one had 120 paper clips in it. And each time he made a sales call, he just moved one paper clip from the full jar into the empty one. And then when he made a second sales call, he moved a second paper clip from the empty jar to the full one and so on. And he just kept doing that call after call until he'd moved all 120 paper clips from one side of the desk to the other. And then Trent, when he did this day after day after day, he started having a lot of success. Within 18 months, he brought $5 million into his firm. He's 23 years old, and this is 1993, so that's just even way more than it is now. He started earning a 6-figure salary by the time he was 24. Again, way more than it is now. He transferred to another company, made even more. And I just love from this story, this thought that Trent must have had, which was sales is just about putting 120 paper clips in a jar every day. Not that strategy doesn't matter, and excellent salespeople, I'm sure, have lots and lots of strategy, but there's also a part to it, which is just about putting the reps in, about getting those calls out, those emails out. So when I say to you, I'd love for you to be treating this as your job, I would urge you to treat it like Trent treated his job. He just got his paper clips in every day in, day out, minimal drama. So the key, I think, then for you becomes, if you were my client, we would have a really detailed conversation about, what are we going to define as the targets that would work for you? So just give you some options. If you were my client, we might brainstorm, would you like an hours-based target? Like maybe you have been hired, quote unquote, to work at this sales job for 5 hours a week. I don't think you need to be working at this sales job for 20 hours a week. Probably if you just did 5 hours of sales activities, that would be valuable. There could certainly also be like an action-based target. So that would be like what Trent has. So maybe you have a goal of like sending your manuscript to 10 agents a week or whatever you think is reasonable. I think for any of these goals, by the way, it's great to have like a physical representation. So maybe you've got like jars of paper clips or pom-poms or marbles or whatever, and you move it from side to side. But that's the second thing you could track. You track an action. And the third thing you could track, of course, would be an outcome. I do not think you should track like how many agency yes as an outcome, because you've already said that that's really hard to get. I would actually love for you to be tracking rejections as an outcome. Like maybe your goal is to get 2 rejections a week. And so then you have to back up and think like, how many agents do I have to query in order to get those 2 rejections a week? That kind of stuff. I think for some people, tracking rejections can turn the rejections into a more positive thing. That's just another option for you. And you could set an overall goal like, can I get up to 100 rejections and can I make a sticker chart at that? And, you can kind of like celebrate the rejections of it. But overall, to me, a solid amount of being a successful salesperson is kind of just like Trent did, just grind it. Trent made 120 calls a day. Not everyone around him was making 120 calls a day. They were procrastinating, they were avoiding, they were doing anything that they could do to avoid doing 120 calls a day. But you know this, I know this. I'm not trying to say this like this is shocking, but of course, when we do our quota of work, we do eventually see results. So I think you are in the same position, just for what it's worth, as many other sales jobs. Certain kinds of sales jobs have a very, very low success rate. Like they may only sell 1 out of 200 pitches they make, but that payoff is like super good. Many sales folks make 200 pitches or more before they sell anything. So it's about, again, putting yourself in a position to have made those pitches. So that's my second suggestion to you. Treat your sales job like an actual, real part-time job that you have been hired to do. You've been hired to sell. Move those paper clips. My third idea for you is a reminder that sales jobs require serious mental and emotional toughness. Or another way of saying this is sales jobs can be really, really tough on your emotions, on your brain, on your nervous system. Or a third way of saying this would be sales jobs can really suck. Salespeople do not always work crazy hours. Often they don't, but they often get paid disproportionately well to the hours that they've worked. Again, not always, but if they are good, they typically do. And when that's true, when they get paid disproportionately well to the hours they work, that happens because the job is very tough on you emotionally and in your head. So again, that's why I want it separated from your writing, and that's why I want you to clearly define what your goals are. And then when you've done all that, when you have done your, 5 hours a week of sales time, or you've done your 10 pitches a week, or whatever you have defined as your goal, I want you to be done. And then I want you to be taking amazing care of yourself. Because again, if we start from this premise that sales jobs can be really tough emotionally, then we need to sort of bake in some of the recovery as part of your kind of quote unquote work time. You mentioned in your sort of upfront point that you've been often told that you should process your emotions, but you aren't always sure what that could mean. The truth is there's not one thing that helps people process their emotions. It's kind of whatever helps you come down, whatever helps your body not hold on to that as much. There's certainly specific techniques I could share, though that's going to make this podcast like hours long, but I think you probably already know some things that help you process your emotions. For some people, exercise is great. For others, writing about it can be really helpful. By the way, there's a trash shark outside of this, so we're doing this. Like I said, for other people, writing can be really helpful. So maybe you're journaling, maybe you're kind of processing all of those emotions and swirling thoughts like on the page so you can return to the rest of your life. Maybe you have some regular walk and talks with friends. You can kind of share all that you're feeling. But I think the key here is factoring in, again, some of that recovery time into your mental conception of what your job is. Like part of your job is recovery. Because I think when we don't do that, then we're just like so annoyed when we feel anxious. But if we have this thing, which is like just like a professional athlete, the recovery is part of my job. It's a normal part of my job. And part of what I do is just building in time recovery to deal with this kind of like unpleasant byproduct. Just like professional athletes are going to factor in time to be in that ice bath, to be stretching, to get massages, all of that stuff. I think it becomes a lot easier to manage. And yes, you may need to treat whatever you do to process those feelings, exercise, journaling, whatever it is. You might need to treat all of that more seriously than other folks who have kind of more stable 9-to-5 jobs, who aren't trying to do something that involves sales or rejection. How can that be true? How can that be okay? How can you make that not a problem? So that's my third idea for you. I sort of would suggest that you acknowledge that transitioning out of your sales job is going to require a bit of energy and care on a regular basis. That's why sales job folks don't always work as long hours, but they sometimes get paid better than folks who do work longer hours. And part of that, not all of that, part of that is because the job is tough emotionally. So it's going to take time to do that every day and every week. Doing that might not be what you prefer, but that might just be part of the job. So that's my third idea for you. My fourth piece of, ideas for you to mull on is try not to quit your job at your job. Try not to quit your job at your job. So try not to quit your sales job while you are working on sales. Try not to quit your writing job while you are working on writing. I just say this because, oh my goodness, I know the insecurity that can come up, all those thoughts about this is never going to work and why bother. They can just come up so intensely that it completely immobilizes us. It makes us want to procrastinate. And I would just say, If you want, you can totally choose to quit later. But if it were me, I would literally have that as a refrain in my head. I don't quit my job at my job. I think you should have a policy that you still have to do the job and the recovery activities. You have to do that walk, that journal, have some tea and reflect. And only after you've done all of that can you think about quitting. So that's my fourth idea, just doing your absolute best to let your brain not make a decision about this while you're at your job. So that's all of my ideas for you. Well, I'm sure I could have more, but that's all I'm sharing on this podcast about how to keep going practically day to day, despite all those rejections that, let's be honest, you're going to keep receiving. But I also hear you that there could be a point at which you say, you know what, this isn't for me anymore. Maybe I should give up. Maybe I should change careers. This sort of like higher level question that you pointed to of like, when is it time to move on? And I have sat with this question for a bit and really reflected on you and all that you're going through. And there's really just one main thing I want to say. And it's, if we're being honest, it's, I would say, a little more spiritual than practical, but it's my truth for this. And I believe this, and I personally, and I've told it to a number of clients in moments like this, and it seemed to help them too. So here's what I would say. I think this question of when and how do I know if it's time to change careers? I think that it is felt or heard within us more than it is decided with our minds. I'll say that again. I think this question, when or how do I know if it's time to change careers? I think it is felt or heard within us more than it is decided with our minds. Another way of saying the same idea would be, I think it's more of a spiritual question. I think it's about what you are called to do. You said you wrote to me on purpose for practical advice, and I love being practical, but also I think some questions are not practical in that way. They are about listening. And I think a question like this, should I keep being a novelist? Should I move on? To me, that's a listening question. It's a question about calling. I don't know about you, Emily, but my sense is that for many creatives, and I use that term very broadly, I would consider myself a creative person too, we don't do this because it is the most quote unquote practical career path. In fact, if we were to look at statistics or probabilities or whatever, it might not be the most practical career path, at least on paper. On a personal level, and I'm just going to do that here because I want to bring my whole heart to this. Me being a life coach was not something that anyone ever asked me to do. It's not something that anyone suggested that I do. Nobody tapped me on the shoulder and said, yes, that's such a great idea. That's such a practical idea. It was something that I did because I really, really wanted to. I felt this kind of calling to do it. I felt pulled to do it. And because I felt a call to do it, I felt a lot of creativity, a lot of motivation and drive towards it. And that has certainly helped me. So I think when we're talking about paths like this, I think we do some of these things, again, because we feel called to do them, because something within us says, this is mine to do, because we would feel uneasy and perhaps not fully right if we didn't do it. But of course, what happens when you begin to feel other things inside of you, like doubt or insecurity or another voice within you that says, well, maybe I should stop? So here's where I want to talk about the idea of trustworthiness. I've talked about this before in my Compass episode, which is about episode 17. I talked about it in episode 38 of my podcast, which is about listening to subtle signals. But to me, as we're talking about this question of being trustworthy, we want to really take in a signal or a knowing or whatever we want to call it that is solid and consistent. I think that's what a trustworthy signal is, because sometimes that signal is quiet, but it's usually solid and consistent. And it's usually, I will also say, kind. If you hear a voice that is critical or reactive or yelling at you in kind of like a mean way, that's usually not a calling. So that's a couple of things. Like this calling is consistent, it's solid, it's usually kind. The other thing that I typically find to be true about trustworthy callings is that they're willing to wait. They are patient. So I think if it's truly right for you to stop, that calling will wait. It is fine for you to keep working on that novel for another week or month or few months. That calling will sit there patiently waiting for you. I am not, to be clear, recommending ignoring it or pushing it away or locking our callings in rooms and throwing away the key. But also, if you aren't sure, you can just keep company with it for a while. You can just visit it every day or every week and see what it does, see how you both relate to each other. Watching it over time will typically tell what you need to know. And the last thing I want to say about callings, and I also spoke about this in my Compass episode as well, there are times when the answers that you're going to get with your navigational equipment, it just isn't clear. Like there are times when it is not either a keep going or a quit and move on. There are times in our lives where we have to sit with there just not being an answer. And that may be true for you, Emily, in at least some point in your writing journey. Personally, for me, literally right now, I have a pretty big decision in my personal life, and I am decently ambivalent between two quite different choices. So what do we do? What do we do in the midst of all that? What do we do when we don't know the right answer? That is another question that I would want you to answer at a time when you feel trustworthy, Emily. You know, what do you want to do if you're not sure? What do you want to do if the answer isn't clear? Do you keep writing until it's like a clear, obvious no? Or do you stop unless it's a clear, obvious hell yes? I don't think there's a right answer here. But again, I'd love for you to find a time when you feel trustworthy to yourself and decide what you believe. And I said, I've talked a couple times about like when you feel trustworthy. I've talked about this a lot in some of my other episodes, but there are times of day, there are times of week, there are activities, whether it's, like I feel trustworthy in the morning, or I feel trustworthy when I'm taking walks, or I feel trustworthy when I'm with friends. And it's about sort of knowing when those times are. So that's my biggest idea about how to sit with rejection, in this long-term way, how to figure out whether we want to continue with you. And that kind of closes out this podcast. We've talked about the long term. We've talked about the rejection day to day. I hope that this is as practical and helpful as you hoped it was, Emily. And I hope that it resonates with you that some of these issues aren't practical per se. They are bigger or deeper or whatever you want to call them. So Emily, I hope you get an agent. I hope you get your novel published very soon. And above all, I hope you know that I'm rooting for you, just like I'm rooting for all of you who are involved in any creative or professional endeavor, who are facing any kind of creative or professional rejection. I'm wishing you all the best as you all keep going despite these rejections. Take care, everyone. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.